Good afternoon and welcome to Q Their Media Studios, where we are in the AppShow set. We are here with a number of people to talk about today the Millennial Media earnings call. So it's interesting with the AppShow. It knows enough to be in the right place at the right time, and then something even more amazing happens. As an example, today Millennial Media has acquired Jumptap. And because of that, we have some people here that are not only associated with the AppShow, but they're associated with Jumptap. So let's go and talk with some of those people and a little bit of the history of the AppShow and some of the news that we have today. So let me go to the other part of the set and we'll start talking with some of our folks. So I'll get on here. Second here, we have Seth Socolow. Seth,
Jimmy, good to see you.
Good to see you. Now Seth is the founder of the AppShow. He's been doing this for 4 years, and he has been both a employee of Jumptap, interestingly enough, and is now the VP of Business Development at AirPush, another mobile media company, which today is in the spotlight. So let's go and talk about, first, let's talk about the history of the AppShow and how that goes into how media and ads have been part of the AppShow and vice versa.
Sure. I mean, thanks, Jimmy. And basically, we've been doing, as you said, we've been doing this AppShow for about 4 years now. I mean, it started really as a live event where we brought together developers to showcase their apps, because there's this, as many people know, there's this challenge in the app ecosystem. How do you get the word out about a new app?
Right.
And today there's close to 1 million apps, and back when we started there were only maybe 75,000. But the challenge is still huge, was then and is even bigger now. How do you get the word out? And that's what we really started with the AppShow, was to help developers get the word out about their apps.
Now, some of the sponsors of the AppShow are the people that we're talking about today. I'm thinking back to Los Angeles, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, July 2010 was the first time we did an AppShow in Los Angeles, and Jumptap was actually our marquee sponsor for that event.
Mm-hmm.
So really interesting today that they've been acquired actually through their sponsorship of the show. I got to know them, they got to know me, and that's actually what led to me working at Jumptap. But I think there's a reason why the AppShow and mobile advertising dovetail so well. I mean, when you look at mobile advertising, there are really two important components to mobile advertising companies, like all the ones we've talked about so far: Millennial Media, Jumptap, AirPush. You have on one side the developers; these are the people that make apps, and on the other side you have the advertiser.
Right. And
the developers, what's happened really in the app ecosystem the last few years is more and more consumers have not been willing to pay for apps. And that's left the developers needing a business model, and more and more they've turned to advertising. So really that's why we've seen mobile ad networks like Jumptap take an interest in the AppShow.
Now, who are the players in the mobile space now? Has it started kind of combining? Are they growing or are they shrinking?
It's a great question. I mean, when you look at mobile advertising in this country, there were really, what I call the big four. Let's go back to 2008-ish, 2007 perhaps even. You had Quattro, you had Millennial Media, you had Jumptap, and you had AdMob. Those were the four big companies. And what happened early on was, and this was around late 2009, what happened was Apple and Google got in a bidding war over AdMob, which was the biggest kind of breakout of those big four. And what happened was Google won the bidding war. They acquired AdMob for $750 million. But in my mind, they actually lost, because the next company that was acquired was Quattro, which turned into iAd when Apple bought them, and Apple bought them for $280 million in January 2010. Okay. That left these two big independents, Jumptap and Millennial. And today, of course, they've merged. There's been an acquisition by Millennial of Jumptap, and I really think it's unprecedented. I mean, we've been sitting here since we just heard the news about 3 hours ago, trying to figure out, was there any precedent for this? Can we come up with any analogies from the past where four big incumbents, two of them got acquired by bigger companies, and two of them merged? So
we had 750 for one, 230-ish for the other, 280 for the other. What was today's?
Great question. It's hard to estimate, but back of the envelope calculations based on Millennial Media's current trading cap, based on their current stock value, and the amount of stock they're issuing to buy Jumptap, it looks like about $150 million acquisition, and it was an all-stock acquisition.
Okay. So now we have some folks with us today that are also Jumptap alumni.
Yeah, I mean, we
let's go and
really, I mean, this
introduce-
is, you know, for those of us who are in this industry, this is really amazing, you know, kind of groundbreaking news that these two companies have come together. And of course, you know, the news is just a few hours old. We're all trying to digest it. I'm sure the morning talk shows tomorrow will have perhaps better analysis than we can do right now. But that's what's fun about doing this live event.
Is that between yourself and our guest today, we have two high stakes players in this industry today to kind of look at this earnings call and kind of pick it apart a little bit.
Sure.
So let's introduce Lara.
Yeah, I'd love to bring on Lara Mehanna. She's the GM of mobile and sales at DataXu, which is a big DSP, which is a programmatic buyer of advertising, and she's of course in charge of mobile. And Lara and I actually know each other because we work together at mobile.
Okay.
So welcome to the program, Lara. She's joining us via Skype from New York.
Thanks, Seth. Thanks, Jimmy.
So just throw it out to you. What do you think about the news today, Lara?
You know, I think it's just great momentum for the mobile space. I think that there's been a lot of negative press around all these companies IPOing and not doing really well. And all of a sudden now you've got these two large companies merging. And I think it just shows that mobile is really, really important. And that everything that's happening in our industry is that mobile is kind of taking over everything. So I think that it's a really important message that's out there, that these two companies are kind of joining forces to kind of make a bigger play in this space.
I mean, were you surprised by the news? Because as I said earlier, Apple bought one, Google bought the other. You know, with Facebook dominating these days, really kind of expecting that maybe a company from outside of a pure play mobile would buy one of these companies. Was the news surprising to you?
Yes, it was shocking to me. I agree with you. If anything, I thought, there are still companies out there that potentially could have made a play, such as Yahoo, maybe Microsoft. Amazon is always looking at these types of companies. There could have been a lot of online companies that are looking to make a larger footprint in mobile that could have gone this way from any of the online ad networks or DSPs. And yet, here these two mobile companies say, one is more premium, the other is much more performance-based, and you've got one that deals with first-party data and the other more with third-party data, and you put those together, and they say together we can be more powerful. I just wouldn't have thought of it. So I definitely think that a lot of people are very surprised.
So, I mean, what do you think that means for companies that are in the digital media space but are not in mobile? May have been looking at perhaps, getting a bigger stake into mobile, to see now there's this big entrenched joint company between Millennial Media and Jumptap.
That's really interesting. The way that I see the whole space is that everything is becoming mobile. Everyone is doing the majority of activities these days on some type of a mobile device outside of maybe the work environment. But we see a lot of stats around, people leaving the office, going home, and they don't boot up the computers anymore. They're using a tablet or they're using their phones. So, when I think about mobile, and, one of the reasons I came to a company that was doing more, cross screen, was because there's more of an interaction between all the different devices, and companies that are not yet taking into consideration what the mobile piece means are definitely going to lose out. However, as more and more of it becomes mobile, I definitely think that you're seeing a lot of these display type companies having to take on and becoming more aware of especially what's happening in the tablet space, and then as well in the smartphone space. So I think it's definitely changes the dynamic. Now you've got a really, really strong mobile company, but you also have all these companies very, very aggressively coming into the space, playing very aggressive in understanding user behavior across screens. And I think it just creates a new dynamic in the space.
Great. Now, I mean, let's move on to the earnings call itself. I listened in, as I know you did, and for full disclosure, I should say I have a small position in Millennial Media. So anyway, I mean, one of the things that I took away from the call, Millennial Media really positioned themselves as the leader in mobile brand advertising, and Jumptap as the leader in mobile performance advertising, and that this combined entity is a lot of synergy from these two different businesses that are both targeted around mobile advertising. We heard Millennial talk about their excitement for buying Jumptap, for their data initiatives around third-party data, also for their large intellectual property patent portfolio. And the other thing that they mentioned was, how Jumptap has really pivoted over the last 18 months and, become a strong programmatic buyer. And that's obviously something that you know a little bit about, Lara, being, head of mobile at DataXu. I mean, what do you think about Jumptap's programmatic buying capabilities and, what that means to the combined entity?
Sure. I think it was really interesting in the call that they emphasized a lot on the programmatic side. And what that said to me is that in order to really play in the future of ad tech, you have to be in the programmatic space. Whether you're doing it from a premium standpoint or a performance standpoint, the technology and the decisioning is becoming so advanced and is creating those efficiencies and results that is really superior to what was there before. So I think what Millennial is saying by having made the acquisition of MetaResolver earlier in the year and now Jumptap was that they needed a fast way to get into this place, get into this space so that they don't become obsolete in the former ad network model that they went or IPO with. So I think that was a really, really important movement. I think Jumptap has very aggressively gotten into the space and has used it very effectively to draw a lot of their performance advertisers into getting the results that they want, utilizing this second place auction marketplace. And according to Millennial, they've been doing a really good job at it, and that's what made them so attractive. The other part that I think is interesting that they mentioned a couple times, but I think this is where the future is going to really determine what this acquisition really means, is Jumptap's agreement with 24/7 that gets them into the display space. So they claim to have 45 million profiles now across display and mobile devices. And if that's a foray for Millennial and Jumptap together to get more into a cross-channel experience, it puts them in a different position than to compete with all these other online companies that are already doing a lot more multi-channel type advertising.
Interesting. Yeah, did you have a question, Jimmy? Yeah.
How does this affect the people who are looking to buy into the advertising? In other words, the buying behavioral differences as things become more and more mobile. Does this affect traditional ad buyers outside mobile, making it easier for them to make their way into mobile?
That's a great question. I mean, I think what we're seeing is that traditional advertisers. I mean, people want to buy audience, and they've really realized that over time, and they've seen just incredibly fast proliferation of mobile devices. Where I've seen stats where the average smartphone user checks their smartphone 120 times a day.
Wow.
And what kind of an advertising opportunity is that? It's a huge one, and it's been slow. It's been a slow shift. I mean, the device usage has grown much faster than the advertisers shifting their advertising dollars from kind of traditional media like television and print towards mobile. Lara, I don't know if you have any comments on whether this news makes it any easier for traditional advertisers to get into mobile.
I think it clarifies if you really need to get into mobile. Now there's a company that's really big and has all these capabilities, and they can do it, and they have the reputation behind them. Where I think we're seeing a shift with a lot of brands and agencies is that they're asking these questions along the lines of, well, is it just mobile, or how can I do it across different screens and across different channels, and how can I bring my media mix all together? So I think that there are two lines of thought that are kind of happening right now. So those companies that are like, what, I really need to be buying in the mobile space, it's, without a doubt, who to go to. When you start really asking your questions as to how you develop this media mix and can you find one company that can do it all, I think that's where, this whole programmatic space is starting to bring a lot other types of solutions to the table.
Great, thanks.
Another interesting thing we heard on the earnings call was that according to IDC, Jumptap was estimated to have about 10.7% of the mobile performance market in the U.S. And meanwhile, you had 18.7% of the market going to Millennial Media. Sorry, let me correct that. It was 10.7% to Jumptap overall in the mobile advertising market in the U.S. Mostly focused on performance. 18.7% for Millennial Media, mostly focused on brand. The combined being about 28.7%, and they posited that makes this combined entity as big as Google. What do you think about that, Lara?
I was surprised to see that too. Just because, I was like, I can understand that they have quite a bit of market share, but I'd love to know how they really, really determine that. Especially, if you're looking at things like inventory, everyone accesses the Google inventory. So from an inventory perspective, size is kind of shared. From a revenue perspective, maybe it's a little bit different. Um, I don't know the answer. I was surprised how big it was. I do know Millennial is the biggest out there from the mobile space, and Jumptap definitely is a strong contender for the second, and very likely from a going out there and getting ad dollars together, they probably could have some of the largest relationships and the largest share of people buying. I think when you're looking at, they probably also took Google only from a display perspective, because if you take the search dollars in mobile, they own everything. So it's interesting. I didn't really know what to think about it when I saw that chart per se.
Interesting. I mean, talk about there's some other themes here. I mean, we heard about performance versus brand. Other things that maybe you could touch on: mobile web versus in-app. We heard Jumptap say that today, 80% of their advertising is in-app actually. And then, another one I'd love you to comment on, Lara, would be international versus domestic.
Yep. So, what I thought was really interesting about the brand versus performance is that it was the first time that these two companies very clearly stated what their advantage and their strong suit was in the marketplace. Because previously, it was always a little bit more vague, right? Nobody wanted to commit the way that AdMob committed eons ago and Quattro committed eons ago before their acquisition, that one was premium, the other was really performance. Between Jumptap and Millennial, we always knew Millennial was a little more branded and Jumptap was a little bit more performance, but publicly it was a little bit more vague. So I think it was really interesting that they actually now went to market with this. And if you think about performance, it makes a lot of sense that 80% of the revenue then is in-app, because on the performance side, where you draw the money, it's kind of like, I call it sometimes these crack dollars, these app downloads. The more you can generate, the more they're willing to spend, because they're getting a direct return on investment. So Jumptap has done a really good job at figuring out how to really maximize and optimize the in-app space and the in-app downloads for clients that are definitely trying to drive a high level of not only downloads but also the engagements within those apps for their customers. So when you think about DR advertising and performance-based advertising, it really is the more results you show, the more money goes into it. So they've really been able to kind of escalate the revenue quickly from that standpoint.
And what do you think about international versus domestic? I mean, one of the things I think we heard on the call was that there's been one very large advertiser, and I think we both know who it is, who's kind of skewed Millennial Media's earnings more towards international than domestic, and they weren't really sure that trend was going to continue.
Right. Their focus on international was quite a strong point of their calls, and the fact that they just did that deal with Ads Reveal as well for the Latin American market gives them a much more global footprint. I also thought it was really interesting that I think it was Paul mentioned that 55% of mobile devices are out of Asia, and soon it's going to be 60%. So they're clearly looking to where people are migrating to these devices at much faster rates, and how they can become the company of choice to kind of interact between the buyers and sellers in those markets. So I thought their international strategy, even though the acquisition of Jumptap really had nothing to do with their international strategy outside of maybe the technology and getting into the programmatic space to make it more low cost and efficient, but from acquiring new markets, I think the Ads Reveal was a little bit more interesting to round out their international kind of foothold in the world.
How much of that is sales of, or the ad sale push into those new markets, or how much is that driven by the increase of actual devices that just naturally pull ad?
Definitely largely, because it's not just the devices, it's the fact that the majority of these devices are now becoming smartphone devices, and with smartphone devices you have access to internet and apps and all these new, not well new for these marketplaces, but all these experiences where you can attract ad dollars, right? So you attract the publishers, you attract the advertisers, you create that marketplace, and these people are utilizing mobile devices as their main, not only communication device, but also internet devices, right? It's really difficult for them to get phone lines in their houses. It's really difficult for them to figure out how to get, internet services at home. And through the phone, they have access to all of this. So I think that the proliferation of that is where Millennial is seeing a lot of opportunity.
But that's still a consuming side for them, not a purchase side. So in these new markets, is it outside coming in, or is it folks that are there realizing that they have the opportunity to also get local to local, as an example?
Oh, that's a great question. Some of these markets you're going to have to go in and go local to local. That's really how it works. I don't really know if I know the answer to that or what my thought is really on that yet.
Okay.
Interesting. So, let's bring the conversation back to programmatic, which again is, one of your areas of expertise, being the general manager of mobile and sales at DataXu. One of the things that I thought was very interesting was Millennial was really touting Jumptap as experts in RTB buying on the call, and that being one of their key interests in acquiring Jumptap. And of course, they had bought MetaResolver, a small DSP, months earlier. So that was an interesting theme. But then they also on the call were really pushing their forthcoming, what they call MMX, which is the Millennial Media Exchange, and how they feel like this combination of being about to launch an exchange and having the expertise from buying was going to be extremely valuable. Can you comment on that at all, Lara?
Sure. So I think with the acquisition of MetaResolver, they bought that very early on. MetaResolver had not really made a foothold yet in the programmatic space, but they had been building and investing in a lot of the tools. And Jumptap, on the other end, comes in with all the advertisers that they're running already through a bidder. So I think putting maybe, some of the MetaResolver tools, which also has a data integration from what I understand with it, with the Jumptap technologies, I think that they can see some synergies there, and they're hoping that that kind of brings their whole story together. So they're linking in their first-party data, the third-party data, the programmatic buying, the tools that they acquire with MetaResolver, and ultimately, hopefully, that becomes the way that they can most effectively and efficiently play in the space. What's interesting with their supply side, their exchange that they're building, is that Millennial, of course, everyone is mediating inventory, but they do have some direct relationships, and with their focus on brand, it's definitely in a way they called it premium in a way. So it's their way to develop a premium marketplace programmatic wise. They can match up potentially brand dollars in a more effective way. If they want to go to long tail, they can do that. So they're kind of playing both sides of the coin. And companies like Nexus, there are a couple of companies out there doing that. I think they still feel from the old ad network model, if they still tap into the inventory, they'll have a better way to kind of match it up with the demand. Even though the technology that they have acquired now probably also does a really good job of really going out there and figuring out what impressions to bid upon. So I think they're trying to maintain some of the exclusivity or those direct relationships so that they have access to the quality inventory, and they're going to do that through the exchange that they're building.
So that's exactly the point I was making. I'd love to talk about it a little bit more. How does this combined entity effectively do that? Play both sides of the coin, where Jumptap could effectively be the leading bidder on the MMX, and how do you still have a natural marketplace when you're first launching an exchange when the company you've just bought is such an expert in buying programmatically?
Yeah, that's a great question, and the answer is you don't, and you don't really know what is going to happen. So if they're building a really efficient and effective marketplace, they'll let the marketplace determine itself who gets what inventory and how this plays out. We still see a lot of companies doing a lot of preferential deals, guaranteed buys. Even in the programmatic space, you hear of companies trying to offload some of their inventory for a premium to say you'll get first call. That goes exactly against the exchange model, and really hurts the efficiency of the marketplace from doing what it does best. But that is the nature of the game. And it wouldn't surprise me that for certain inventory and figuring out how to deliver on certain deals, that having access to both sides, they have the ability to figure out how to utilize it to their advantage. I think it's just kind of part of doing business in this space a little bit as well. But I would prefer more efficient marketplaces. We like to keep clear lines between demand and supply. I just think that it works better for both publishers and advertisers in the end to let the market really determine the value of the inventory and the value that advertisers are placing on the value of a customer, as opposed to unnaturally, kind of elevating some of these CPM prices.
So we've talked high-level strategy, and obviously, as I said earlier, we're all just digesting this news. It's only a few hours old. What do you think? Getting down to kind of the nuts and bolts of what the next few months are going to look like. We both know you were there a lot longer than I was, but we both, as we said earlier in the program, worked at Jumptap. Jumptap is based in Boston, has offices in a variety of cities. You have Millennial based in Baltimore. These two companies were fierce competitors. It didn't seem like they liked each other a lot, and now today we hear they're merging. How do you think this is all going to play out, Lara?
It always looks easier on the outside than it is on the inside. I think it's going to be challenging. I think that the industry and these companies had to make a move, and one like this is a very interesting one. And I just think at the end of the day, they're going to have to figure it out, right? There are going to be parts of the integration that are not going to be easy. It's going to take some time probably to figure out how those pieces all fit together. But at the end of the day, now Jumptap is merged with a company, and they're a public company, and they're beholden to shareholders, and they have to listen to a different set of people and how to move the business moving forward. And I think that that's going to be a very interesting new start for a lot of the folks in the company and figuring out how to operate in this new dynamic. But on the other hand, I think they're going to also have access to a lot of what Millennial has, which will open the eyes and opportunities for a lot of what Jumptap has done over the last couple of years.
Did they mention anything about redundancies?
They did. I mean, sorry, I'm not sure if the question was audible, but Jimmy was asking me if they talked about redundancies, and they did talk about some significant cost savings of, I think it was roughly 20 to 25 million that was going to come from the combination. Some of that is technology redundancies, ad servers, and other technology that they will no longer need two of. But you have to think that a significant portion of that is going to be overlapping personnel, and there will be some folks let go.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I was surprised to hear how many salespeople Millennial had. They have 132 salespeople. That's a huge number of salespeople for any company of that size. So that alone, you see the differences between some of the technologies, but you do have to imagine that there will be some slimming down. It happens with every company, but at the end of the day, if they can create the value or create positions where people can grow in different areas, then they can figure out how to make it work.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, one of the big themes that I took away from the call as well, and we heard it both from Paul Palmieri, who's the CEO of Millennial Media, and then also echoed by George Bell, who is I guess you call him the outgoing CEO of Jumptap. He's going to stay on as executive vice chairman, I think they said, of the combined entity. They both talked about the fact that this combined entity is going to be able to maintain their independence and their focus. What do you think about that, Lara?
One can only hope. The only reason I say that is I think every company that's going through acquisitions, and there have been a couple other in the past, they always say this, and they manage to do it for a period of time, 6 months, maybe 12 months, but at some point they do have to really fully integrate so that they can operate as one. And maybe they're different lines of businesses, but at the end of the day, it can't be one Millennial and there's a subsidiary Jumptap. It really needs to be Millennial, and maybe there's a performance line of business and a brand line of business, and how do those two things work independently or together? I think down the road, in order to really be successful, they're going to have to figure out how to make it more of an integrated entity.
So then I guess the name going forward is Millennial Media. The name Jumptap is no longer. I mean, we saw United and Continental Airlines merge earlier and keep the name United but use the Continental logo. Any ideas what's going to happen there, Lara?
I probably guess that it's going to go forward with Millennial Media. I think Jumptap will, have some value in its name for a short period of time, but at some point it's all going to become Millennial. I mean, look what happened with Quattro and Apple. Nobody says Quattro anymore. Everyone talks about iAd. A lot of people don't even know what Quattro is. That's right. You still hear a little bit around AdMob, but it's really all Google. So I think if history shows us anything, it will go by one name in the future.
Does this add any confusion to a developer? Thinking about it from a developer side or somebody who's actually going and thinking about bringing it into from either implementation within apps, things along those lines. Does this help? Does this hurt? Does it make it just easier to go and deal with 1 or 2 or 3 platforms maybe?
That's a great question. I mean, we've talked about advertisers, but as I mentioned earlier in the program, I mean, the other big part of this ecosystem is the developer. And what does this mean to developers? I mean, developers, their lifeblood, for a lot of them who've chosen this as their business model, they don't sell paid apps or have another business model, is advertising revenue. And I mean, I guess my thoughts on that, for some, partly you have one big competitor going away, and so there isn't as much push and pull to try to get a developer to go to one network versus the other by enticing them with a higher rev share or higher CPMs. So it
Yep.
this may not be good news for developers. What do you think, Lara?
Yeah, that could be. I see it a little bit differently, though, I think, in this case, because unless Millennial starts making a real investment in building out a kind of a performance exchange where a lot of the app developers are playing, their exchange, from what I understand, is really tapping into a little bit more of the premium side of the inventory. They do have some of that long tail, but that's where the relationships are. I think developers are tired of integrating so many SDKs and trying to figure out which is best and what to do. So it makes that decision a little easier. And then with Jumptap being more on the programmatic side, they have access to all this inventory and they can really maximize it without having to worry about all that integration. So I think it depends on where the Millennial exchange really goes. If they really decide to go into the mid to the long tail, then to your point, Seth, yes, possibly you've got one less person in the mix, but I think you've got so many supply side exchanges coming up and everyone is vying for their inventory, and now you have these online exchanges like Rubicon and OpenX and Pubmatic all very aggressively going into the mobile space, and even though they're coming in from the website, they see the app side and want to hit it aggressively. So I think different types of competitors are emerging. So I think in the end, the developers, will be okay overall.
So I mean, you brought it up. Let's follow up on that point. I mean, there's another kind of piece of this ecosystem that sits between the developer and the mobile ad network, being the mediators. What do you think this news, and just for everyone on the program, mediators, basically developers can round robin an ad impression, which is a view within their app, and see which of the various mobile ad networks is paying them is willing to pay the most for that impression. What do you think this news means to the mediators, Lara?
Every mediator that I know that's still out there is thinking very seriously or working very, very aggressively in either building or finding out a solution to get their inventory exchange traded. So to me, it says that's where the future is. The efficiencies that are created with an exchange are just unparalleled to the ad network model. What people were concerned about was the premium side and all these premium brands that didn't want to stick their inventory in exchanges, where it was considered a little bit more mid to long tail. But now you're seeing this emergence of all these private permission-based exchanges where publishers can now protect the quality of their inventory and the advertisers that are accessing it. So it's created this dual marketplace that allows all different types of publishers to play, and those in the mediation space where they used to have a model of creating kind of a pecking order or first call, second call, third call. It's a little bit old-fashioned compared to the ability to send everybody all the inventory and really get the best value and the best yield on every single impression. So I think a lot of these mediators are hooking into, trying out, or starting to develop bidding capabilities so that they can play in this space.
So summing up what you just said, fair to say that mobile RTB is killing mobile mediation?
Well, I wouldn't say killing because there's still a lot of business being run in mediation, a ton of business, but I definitely see that as the trend, right? That's where inventory is going. That's where people are investing.
Cool. What about quantitative? So if you have the ability, so last week on the show we had Edwin Marks.
Yep.
And he's talking about quantitative and being able to have, and some interesting news, backstory on that, is that his app that he was talking about and showing, unfortunately, Apple said, nope, too close to iTunes.
Yeah, for those of you who weren't watching last week on the program, and you can see this in the archives, we had Edward Marks, who's developed a fabulous app for kind of going back and looking at apps that were popular in at previous times of the App Show. We've got 5 years of the Apple iOS App Store, and his app allows you to browse what was popular back then.
So now, with that not being there, so people trying to get into the space to see how an app is doing, do the ad networks that we're talking about now become maybe one of the few places that I can get some sort of data on either, I mean, ads being played, but also even just, if I'm looking as a developer for any quantitative stuff, can I be looking at some of these networks? And this is a naive question on my part, but what some of these ad platforms may give me in the way of usage.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an interesting question, Jimmy. And one of the things that we heard come up on the call as well, I was actually surprised that an analyst from Wall Street was this savvy about the mobile advertising industry to ask about independent tracking technologies that might be important to developers. And they actually directed that question more towards Jumptap than Millennial, in that Jumptap has been more on the driving downloads for app developers. And interesting that the comment from Jumptap CEO George Bell was that they've done the grunt work, he called it, and the hard technology integration to support basically any independent ad tracking that an advertiser might want to use. What do you think about that, Lara?
I think that was a very smart decision because the space is so complex and it's so complicated. There's no leader, there's no standard, and the only way to really play in that space is to offer all those different types of solutions. The other thing that I think it links in with is a lot of their work they're doing with the third-party deals, as third-party companies for data, as well as what they're doing with 24/7 and trying to connect users across display and mobile. The more ways they have to understand the users, the better off they are in connecting those dots. So I think by nature of their vision, they had to make that decision to say, you know what, we can't just focus on one solution, we have to go with all of them. And I will take this back to an example of when all the ID hashing technologies came out, and everybody was trying to figure out, do we go MD5, do we go SHA-1? And certain companies were like, no, we're doing MD5, and other ones were SHA-1, and people were making a play for one or the other. And in the end, everything seems to be going more SHA-1, but then you have now a double hash technology. Your best answer was to have done both. So I think that a lot of folks have learned from that and have said, until there are standards, we better make sure that we can do every capability in mobile because it's changing and moving too fast.
Okay, Lara, final words. What do you think this news means, and what are we going to be looking at 3 months, 6 months down the road based on this combined company?
I think it definitely says that mobile companies have a foothold in this space, that the mobile industry is growing, that it's not going away. I think what's going to be really interesting is to figure out how the Millennial Jumptap merger takes being in mobile and becomes more than just mobile, because I think if you're mobile only, then in the app space, you definitely understand how that marketplace is going to continue to grow. But if you start looking at the web and you start looking at how things are merging and people aren't really, thinking too much around if they're consuming content, web content on desktops, on tablets, or on phones, your strategy needs to be a little different. So I think when I look at this acquisition, what's going to be really interesting is, one, how does Millennial really get into the programmatic space? But two, how do they get beyond just mobile and really make a foothold for a bigger play in the digital space?
So how do you think Wall Street's going to receive this news? Because after hours trading, I mean, Millennial was down overall today. I saw about 10%, and then an additional 8% in after hours trading. Actually, I have this backwards. It was down 8% on the day and 10% in after hours trading, an additional 10%. Do you think there's going to be a bounce in the stock, and how do you think Wall Street's going to react over the longer term?
Some of the questions at the end of the call were really interesting around some of the earnings numbers and the revenue numbers, and there seemed to be quite a bit of skepticism there. Putting these two companies together, I thought from a revenue standpoint, the total revenue numbers would actually be a little bit higher. So I think that there is going to be skepticism in the marketplace. I also think with these recent IPOs, none of them have done super fantastically. So I think people are going to be a little bit more conservative. They're going to wait and see. I think it will just kind of stay and hover where it is for a while. And then, if Millennial Jumptap integration can actually start producing real results, I think that Wall Street will start getting behind it. But, I think Wall Street wants to be behind these mobile companies, but there's just a lot of skepticism with a lot of these companies that are going out there and what the real value is, not only just today, but what does it mean 5 years from now?
Great. Well, I mean, I think it's very surprising but exciting news for all of us, and I'm personally very curious to see where the stock goes from here and what this means for the industry. Obviously, as I said earlier, I'm VP of Business Development for AirPush. What this is going to mean for our business going forward as a significant player in the market space with this now larger combined competitor.
Yeah.
Jimmy, any final words?
Well, I think that as a developer, it's interesting for me to go and watch this, to go and see how it's going to play out. It's interesting from an AppShow participant as a technical director, being in front now, being able to go and help out this way. I wanted to go and remind people about the Facebook, to be able to go off and hit the Facebook page for the SF App Show.
Great.
And go and find out, get some comments on what you saw today, and comments for future shows as well.
Yeah, and if you want to reach me, I'm reachable, Seth at appshow.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at AppShow. Our website, of course, is appshow.com, and we stream these shows, moving to more of a weekly format at appshow.com/live, but you're probably there already if you found us. So thanks, everyone, for tuning in. I want to thank, if we can go to her again, full screen one last time, I want to thank Lara Mehanna, who's the General Manager of Mobile and Sales at DataXu, who joined us late tonight from New York via Skype. Thanks for your time today, Lara.
Thank you for having me. Great chatting with you guys.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. We'll see you next week.